All right, so today we're going to be diving into this whole assassination attempt on President William McKinley back in 1901.
Okay.
And the source that we're going to be using for that is an episode of American History Tellers.
Okay.
And it takes us to the Pan-American Exposition, which
Yeah.
is just this like really fascinating event. It was supposed to be this huge symbol of progress for America at the turn of the century. Yeah, the interesting thing is that we're trying to really project this image of America as a rising power.
Yeah.
You know, at the dawn of this new century.
Right.
And they had all this new technology on display. They were super excited about electricity and all the things that they could do with it. And it's just a really interesting time to look at and to see how people were thinking about the future.
Yeah, and just opposed to all of that progress,
Right.
there's this undercurrent of unrest and economic hardship and radical ideology.
Yeah, that's what makes it so fascinating to me.
You have this really stark contrast between like the optimism of the exposition
Right.
and then the reality of what a lot of people were experiencing.
Right. So,
Particularly the working class.
yeah, can you paint a picture for us of what the Pan-American Exposition was all about?
So it was this massive World's Fair held in Buffalo, New York.
Okay.
And they transformed the city into this like dazzling spectacle of lights and futuristic exhibits.
Wow.
It was like stepping into the future,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And they had all these technological marvels on display, things that people had never seen before. So yeah, it was really meant to be this celebration of American ingenuity and optimism.
Yeah.
But like we were saying, there were some darker undercurrents at play.
Yeah, the podcast mentions the Panic of 1893.
Right.
How did that, that economic event cast a shadow on all of this?
Well, the Panic of 1893 was a really devastating economic depression that shook the entire nation. I mean, businesses were crumbled, banks were failing, unemployment skyrocketed. It was a really tough time for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
And it created this deep sense of disillusionment and resentment, especially among the working class who felt like the system had completely failed them.
Right, so it's within this context that we meet Leon Czolgosz.
Exactly.
Who was this guy?
So Czolgosz was a young Polish-American laborer,
Okay.
and he was profoundly affected by the economic hardships of the time.
So he was like a typical working class guy who was just trying to make ends meet.
Yeah, pretty much he was working at the Cleveland Rolling Mill,
Okay.
and it was known for its like really grueling conditions and low pay. And then a strike erupted, and Czolgosz participated hoping for better conditions, but the strike ultimately failed.
Oh, wow.
And the worst part is he got blacklisted for participating.
Oh, no.
So he couldn't find steady work after that.
Right, so this experience like really fueled his anger and disillusionment.
Yeah, exactly. It like solidified his belief that the system was rigged against the working class.
So is that when he turned to anarchism?
Yes, that's exactly when he found solace in the ideology of anarchism.
Okay, so tell us about anarchism. Like, what did anarchists believe in?
So basically, anarchists advocate for the abolition of government and all forms of hierarchy.
Wow, so they basically want to get rid of all authority.
Right. They believe that society can function without these systems of control.
That's a pretty radical idea.
It is. And it was particularly appealing to people like Czolgosz, who had been marginalized and felt oppressed by the existing power structures.
Right, they felt like the system wasn't working for them, so why not just get rid of it altogether?
Exactly. And Czolgosz became especially fascinated by the concept of propaganda of the deed.
Yeah, what is that exact? I've heard that term before, but I'm not really sure what it means.
So basically, propaganda of the deed is the idea that you can use violence as a way to inspire revolution.
Like, as a form of protest.
Kind of, but it's more than just protest. It's about striking at these symbols of power and oppression.
Oh, I see. So it's like making a statement through violence.
Yeah, they believe that these acts, even if carried out by individuals, would like spark a wider uprising.
So it's not about achieving specific political goals. It's more about just like waking people up.
Right. It's about showing people the brutality of the state and inspiring them to take action.
And the podcast mentions that Czolgosz was like really struck by the attempted assassination of Henry Clay Frick.
Yeah, that's right. Frick was this powerful industrialist,
Okay.
known for being pretty ruthless in suppressing labor movements.
So he was kind of like the enemy in the eyes of the working class.
Pretty much. And in 1892, he was targeted in an assassination attempt.
Wow.
It was unsuccessful, but it definitely made an impact on Czolgosz.
So it's like even though that attempt failed, it kind of planted a seed in Czolgosz's mind.
Yeah, I think it showed him that it was possible to strike at these powerful figures.
Right.
And that these acts could have a ripple effect, even if they didn't achieve their immediate goals.
Yeah, I guess it's like one act of violence can inspire others even if it doesn't succeed.
Exactly. And in Czolgosz's case, this ripple effect was amplified by another key figure in this story. Emma Goldman.
Okay, I've heard of Emma Goldman. She was a pretty famous anarchist, right?
Yeah, she was a very charismatic and controversial figure who was like a leading voice in the anarchist movement at the time.
So what was her role in all of this?
Well, Goldman advocated for radical social change.
Okay.
She drew huge crowds with her speeches, denouncing capitalism, the state, traditional morality, all of it.
Wow, so she was like a real firebrand.
Oh, yeah. She wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, and Czolgosz was deeply drawn to her ideas.
So was he like a fanboy or something?
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
He admired her so much that he sought her out in Chicago.
Really?
Yeah. But their encounter was brief and kind of awkward.
Oh, that's funny.
But even though it was a short meeting, Goldman's words had a profound impact on Czolgosz.
I guess you never know how your ideas might influence others, even if you don't intend for them to have that effect.
Yeah, and in this case, those ideas would converge with a specific target. President William McKinley, who in Czolgosz's mind represented everything he'd come to despise.
Okay, so we've got this backdrop of economic hardship, the influence of radical ideology, and a president who becomes the symbol of everything Czolgosz wants to destroy.
Yeah, and all of these threads are about to collide at the Pan-American Exposition.
This is where it all comes to a head.
Yeah, this is where the story takes a really dark turn.
Okay, so let's get into that. Set the scene for us. It's September 6th, 1901.
All right.
McKinley's at the exposition.
Yes, he's there greeting visitors in the Temple of Music.
Okay.
Which was this grand structure built specifically for the event.
Mm-hmm.
And McKinley was known for his warm demeanor.
Okay.
He was very willing to shake hands with anyone who came forward.
That seems crazy to me today. I can't imagine a president just like casually shaking hands with a huge crowd.
Yeah, it was a different time.
Yeah.
Security was much less stringent back then.
Right.
And McKinley prided himself on his accessibility to the people.
But that accessibility would have tragic consequences.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So Czolgosz is in the crowd waiting for his moment.
Yes, he had concealed a revolver beneath a handkerchief. And he's just patiently biding his time, waiting for the right opportunity.
It's crazy to think that someone could be standing there planning to do something so horrific while everyone else is just enjoying the festivities.
Yeah, it's chilling. And as McKinley extended his hand, Czolgosz stepped forward and fired 2 shots.
2 shots? I always thought it was just 1.
A lot of people think that, but he actually fired twice.
Wow.
One bullet ricocheted off a button or a rib, causing only a minor wound.
Okay.
But the other bullet entered McKinley's abdomen, and that's the one that caused significant damage.
Oh, wow. The podcast describes the scene as absolute pandemonium.
It was chaos,
Yeah.
pure chaos.
Yeah.
People were screaming, scrambling for safety, and McKinley clutched his stomach and collapsed to the ground.
It's hard to even imagine the terror and confusion that people must have felt.
It was a moment of complete shock and disbelief.
And amidst all of this chaos, there's this incredible act of heroism.
Yes. Tell me about James Parker.
Yeah, he was an African-American waiter working at the exposition,
Yeah.
and he was standing near McKinley when the shots rang out.
Yeah. And without any hesitation, he lunged at Czolgosz and tackled him to the ground.
Yeah, and that prevented Czolgosz from firing a 3rd shot.
Wow, that's amazing. That took some serious courage.
It really did. He could have easily been killed himself.
I mean, it's just incredible that in that moment of chaos, he was able to react so quickly and bravely.
He's definitely a hero of this story.
Right. But even with Parker's quick thinking, the situation was still extremely dire.
Yeah, McKinley had been shot, and the severity of his wounds was still unknown.
So what happened next?
They rushed him to the exposition's emergency hospital.
Okay, and I guess this is where the irony comes in.
Exactly, because the exposition was showcasing all this amazing new medical technology.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
Yeah, they had incubators for premature babies, x-ray machines. It was supposed to be this testament to the progress of modern medicine.
But it wasn't enough to save McKinley.
No, unfortunately not.
So even with all these advancements, they couldn't save him.
Well, the hospital itself was actually ill-equipped to handle such a complex case. Oh, wow. So they had all this fancy technology, but not the expertise or the resources to actually use it effectively.
Yeah, it was a really strange situation. They didn't even have electricity in the operating room.
What?
Yeah, and they had a hard time finding a surgeon with the necessary experience.
I mean, you'd think that they would have a top-notch surgeon on hand for an event like this.
You would think so, but they didn't.
Hmm.
They eventually found a surgeon, Dr. Matthew Mann.
Okay.
But he was a gynecologist, not a trauma surgeon.
I guess a surgeon is a surgeon, right?
Well, to some extent, yes.
Yeah.
But operating on the president under these conditions was an immense challenge.
Right, especially without electricity and the proper equipment.
Exactly. They had to use reflected sunlight to eliminate the wound.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And Dr. Mann couldn't locate the second bullet. He assumed it was lodged in McKinley's back and cleaned the wound as best he could and sutured the stomach.
So they just patched him up and hoped for the best.
Pretty much. And initially there was a sense of optimism. McKinley seemed to be recovering well. Yeah. But within a few days, his condition deteriorated rapidly.
Oh, no.
Gangrene set in, and it became clear that he wasn't going to make it.
I can only imagine the tension and uncertainty that must have surrounded those final days.
Yeah, the whole nation was on edge, waiting for news.
And then 8 days after the shooting, McKinley died.
Yes, it was a tragic end to his presidency and a shock to the nation.
And amidst all of this mourning and the calls for justice, there's another layer to this story.
Right.
The aftermath of the assassination and its impact on the anarchist movement.
Exactly. Czolgosz was immediately apprehended and put on trial.
And what happened to him?
Well, during his interrogation and trial, he remained very calm and unwavering in his motivations.
Okay.
He claimed to have been inspired by Emma Goldman's ideas.
Oh, no.
And that association would have significant consequences for her and the entire anarchist movement.
So they basically pinned this on Emma Goldman?
Not directly, but Czolgosz's claims fueled a wave of anti-anarchist sentiment.
Right, because people were looking for someone to blame.
Yeah. And Goldman became an easy target, even though she vehemently denied any involvement in the assassination plot.
So guilt by association.
Pretty much. Shows how quickly fear and anger can lead to the suppression of dissenting voices.
Even those that advocate for peaceful change.
Exactly. And so while McKinley lay dying, the authorities were cracking down on anarchists across the country.
What kind of impact did that have on the movement?
It dealt a severe blow to anarchism in America.
Okay.
Authorities started viewing anarchists as dangerous criminals, not as political dissidents.
Right, so it shifted the whole perception of the movement.
Yeah, their writings were censored, their meetings were disrupted, and many were imprisoned or deported.
Wow, that's intense. It's almost ironic, isn't it? Czolgosz tries to strike a blow against the establishment, but he ends up giving them an excuse to crack down on the very movement he claimed to represent.
It's a classic example of how violence, even when motivated by ideology, can backfire and have the opposite effect of its intended goal.
So the anarchist movement is facing suppression. And at the same time, a new figure is about to step onto the stage.
A figure who embodies a very different vision of American power, Theodore Roosevelt.
Okay, so let's talk about Teddy. He was McKinley's vice president, right?
That's right.
So he automatically assumed the presidency after McKinley died.
Yes, that's how it works.
Yes.
On September 14th, 1901, just 8 days after McKinley's death.
Wow, that's fast.
Yeah, they didn't waste any time. Theodore Roosevelt was sworn in as the 26th President of the United States.
And this was a pretty significant turning point in American history, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. McKinley represented a more traditional approach to politics.
Okay.
Focused on diplomacy, trade, a cautious approach to foreign intervention. But Roosevelt was a completely different kind of leader.
How so?
He was much more forceful and energetic.
Okay.
Eager to assert American power on the world stage.
So in a way, Czolgosz's act paved the way for a more aggressive and interventionist foreign policy.
You could definitely argue that it's impossible to say for certain how McKinley's presidency would have unfolded if he had survived.
Right.
But Roosevelt's ascension marked a very clear shift in America's role in global affairs.
It really is amazing to think that one man's actions driven by anger and ideology could set off such a chain reaction.
Yeah, it's a testament to the law of unintended consequences.
Right. You never know how your actions might ripple outwards and impact the course of history.
And that's what makes the story so fascinating.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the interconnectedness of events and how individual choices can intersect with historical forces in really profound ways.
Absolutely, and I think that's something we'll continue to see as we delve deeper into Roosevelt's presidency and its impact on the 20th century.
Okay, so Roosevelt takes office.
Yeah.
What were some of the key differences between his approach to leadership and McKinley's?
Well, McKinley was known for his cautious and deliberate style. He favored diplomacy and trade as the primary tools of American foreign policy.
Okay.
He was reluctant to use military force unless absolutely necessary.
So he was kind of like, speak softly and carry a big stick, but maybe more focused on the speak softly part.
Exactly. And that's where the contrast with Roosevelt becomes really apparent.
Okay.
Roosevelt fully embraced the big stick diplomacy.
So he was ready to use force if he felt it was necessary.
Absolutely. He believed that America should project its power and influence on the world stage.
So he saw America's role as being more of a global policeman?
You could say that he believed in American exceptionalism.
Okay.
The idea that the United States had a unique responsibility to shape world events.
Wow, this is all starting to sound familiar.
Right.
It's like we can trace a direct line from Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy to many of the foreign policy debates we're still having today.
Exactly. Roosevelt's presidency marked a turning point, a shift away from isolationism towards a more active and assertive role on the world stage.
And it's all thanks to Leon Czolgosz, the anarchist assassin who thought he was striking a blow against the system but ended up propelling America into a new era of global power.
It's a fascinating and unsettling example of how history can be shaped by these unintended consequences.
Czolgosz's act was a tragedy, but it also served as a catalyst for profound change, accelerating trends that were already in motion and ushering in a new chapter in American history.
And that's what we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. I'm really curious to see where this goes.
Me too. It's going to be interesting to unpack the long-term consequences of Roosevelt's presidency and how they continue to shape the world we live in today.
Yeah, this has been a wild ride so far.
It has. We started with the World's Fair, delved into the world of anarchism, witnessed a presidential assassination, and now we're exploring the rise of American global power.
It's amazing how all these threads connect.
It really is. It just shows how complex and interconnected history truly is.
And I think it's a reminder that we should never take history for granted.
Right.
There's always more to learn and new connections to make.
Absolutely. And that's what we'll continue to do in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so for our listeners, if you want to delve deeper into this story, we've got some great resources linked in the show notes.
Yes, definitely check those out.
But for now, remember, history is full of surprises, and sometimes the most impactful moments come from the most unexpected places.
Well said.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
See you then. Yeah. So where were we? Oh, McKinley was shot. Pandemonium breaks out and they rush into the hospital.
Right. And the crazy thing is that the hospital was like right there at the exposition.
Right. It was part of the whole like showcase of progress in technology.
But I guess all that fancy technology didn't really matter in the end.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic, isn't it? They had all these cutting-edge exhibits, but the hospital itself was woefully unprepared for a situation like this.
So what happened?
Well, they had all these medical marvels on display, like incubators for premature babies and x-ray machines.
Okay.
But the actual operating room was really basic. They didn't even have electricity.
Wait, no electricity? How did they even operate on him?
They had to use reflected sunlight.
Seriously? That's insane.
I know, right? And on top of that, they couldn't find a surgeon with the right expertise.
Oh.
They ended up getting Dr. Matthew Mann.
Okay.
But he was a gynecologist, not a trauma surgeon.
Oh, so he wasn't exactly qualified to be operating on the president.
Not really. But they didn't have much choice.
So what did he do?
Well, he operated on McKinley as best he could, but he couldn't locate the second bullet.
Oh.
Yeah, he just assumed it was lodged in McKinley's back somewhere.
And they left it in there.
Yeah, they cleaned the wound as best they could, sutured the stomach, and hoped for the best.
So basically they patched him up and crossed their fingers?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And for a while, it seemed like he might actually pull through.
Really?
Yeah, there was a period of a few days where his condition seemed to be improving.
Okay.
But then things took a turn for the worse.
What happened?
Gangrene set in.
Oh.
And it spread quickly. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't stop it.
So he died from the infection?
Yeah. 8 days after the shooting, McKinley succumbed to his wounds.
It's a pretty tragic end to a presidency that had so much promise.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even with all of our technological advancements, we're still vulnerable to the unpredictable nature of life.
Right, and in the midst of all this tragedy and mourning, there's another story that starts to unfold.
Right, the story of what happened to Czolgosz and the impact of the assassination on the anarchist movement.
So what happened to him?
He was immediately apprehended
Okay.
and put on trial for murder.
And what did he say in his defense?
He didn't really offer much of a defense.
Oh, really?
He admitted to shooting McKinley,
Wow.
and he said that he was inspired by the ideas of Emma Goldman.
Oh, no. So they went after her, too?
Well, not exactly, but Czolgosz's claims definitely fueled anti-anarchist sentiment.
Right, because people were looking for someone to blame.
Yeah, and Goldman became an easy target, even though she denied any involvement in the assassination.
That's not fair. It's like they were holding her responsible for something she had nothing to do with.
Yeah, it's a classic example of guilt by association.
Right, and this had a pretty big impact on the anarchist movement as a whole, didn't it?
Yeah, it definitely did. The authorities cracked down on anarchists across the country.
What did they do?
They censored their writings, disrupted their meetings, imprisoned, and deported many of them.
Wow, so they basically tried to silence the entire movement.
Pretty much.
Right.
It was a really dark time for anarchists in America.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Czolgosz sets out to strike a blow against the government, but he ends up giving them the perfect excuse to crack down on the very movement he claimed to represent.
Yeah, it's a classic example of how violence can backfire and have the opposite effect of its intended goal.
So the anarchist movement is facing suppression.
Right.
And at the same time, this new figure is about to emerge on the political scene, Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah, McKinley's vice president.
And he's about to become one of the most consequential presidents in American history.
Absolutely. Roosevelt's presidency was a major turning point.
Okay.
It marked a shift away from isolationism and towards a more active and assertive role for America on the world stage.
So Czolgosz's act kind of inadvertently paved the way for the rise of American global power.
Yeah, it's one of those strange twists of fate that make history so fascinating and unpredictable.
So what were some of the key differences between Roosevelt's approach to leadership and McKinley's?
Well, McKinley was much more cautious and deliberate.
Okay.
He preferred to rely on diplomacy and trade.
Okay.
And he was really hesitant to use military force.
So he was kind of like the speak softly part of speak softly and carry a big stick.
Exactly. And Roosevelt was definitely all about the big stick.
Oh, yeah. He wasn't afraid to flex America's muscles.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He believed that the United States had a responsibility to maintain order in the world.
So he was kind of like a global policeman.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
He believed in American exceptionalism, the idea that the United States had a unique role to play in shaping world events.
So it sounds like he was laying the groundwork for America's emergence as a global superpower.
Yeah, you could definitely say that his policies expanded American influence, strengthened the military, and established a precedent for interventionism that would continue throughout the 20th century.
It's amazing to think that all of this can be traced back, at least in part, to the actions of one lone anarchist assassin.
Yeah, it's a reminder that history is full of unexpected twists and turns, and that individual actions can have far-reaching consequences that we can't always predict.
So we've talked about the immediate aftermath of the assassination.
Right.
But what about the long-term consequences?
Well, that's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so what can we expect?
We're going to delve into Roosevelt's presidency
Okay.
and look at how his policies, both foreign and domestic, shaped the 20th century and continue to have an impact on the world we live in today.
Sounds good. I'm definitely ready to dive deeper into this.
Me too. There's still a lot to unpack here.
So last time we were talking about how Theodore Roosevelt took over as president after McKinley was assassinated.
Right. Big shoes to fill for sure.
Yeah, and he seemed to have a very different approach to foreign policy than McKinley.
Oh, definitely. McKinley was much more cautious and hesitant to use military force,
Right.
whereas Roosevelt was all about projecting American power on the world stage.
So what were some of the specific ways that this difference played out?
Well, one of the most striking examples is Roosevelt's approach to Latin America and the Caribbean.
Okay.
He believed that the United States had this special responsibility to maintain stability and order in the region.
So he saw it as being like America's backyard.
Kinda, yeah. He saw it as being vital to American interests, both economically and strategically.
And that's where his famous big stick diplomacy comes in.
Exactly. Roosevelt believed in speaking softly and carrying a big stick.
Right. And he wasn't afraid to use that stick when he felt it was necessary.
Not at all. He intervened in numerous countries in the region,
Okay.
often using military force to protect American investments, quell unrest, or even support independence movements that aligned with American goals.
So he was kind of like a global policeman.
Yeah, some people saw him that way. He was definitely willing to use American power to shape events in the region.
And one of the most significant examples of this is the Panama Canal, right?
Absolutely. Roosevelt was determined to build a canal across Central America to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans.
And this was a huge undertaking.
Oh, yeah. It was a massive engineering project, and there were a lot of obstacles to overcome.
So how did Roosevelt manage to pull it off?
Well, he was a master negotiator and a shrewd politician.
Okay.
But he was also willing to play hardball when he needed to.
What do you mean?
Well, initially, he tried to negotiate a treaty with Colombia,
Okay.
who controlled Panama at the time,
Right.
but the negotiations stalled,
Mm.
and Roosevelt got impatient.
So what did he do?
He threw his support behind a Panamanian independence movement.
So he basically helped to orchestrate a revolution?
Yeah, some people would say that with American backing, Panama declared independence from Colombia, and then the United States quickly recognized the new Panamanian government and secured the rights to build and control the canal.
Wow. That's some pretty bold maneuvering.
It was, and it definitely solidified Roosevelt's reputation as a president who wasn't afraid to take decisive action.
So the Panama Canal is a pretty big legacy for Roosevelt.
Oh, yeah. It's one of his most enduring achievements. It transformed global trade and travel, and it also cemented America's dominance in the region.
And it wasn't just Latin America, right?
Roosevelt also flexed American muscle in other parts of the world.
Okay. Like, ooh.
Well, he mediated the Russo-Japanese War.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he actually won a Nobel Peace Prize for that.
Really?
Yeah, it was a big deal. But he also sent the Great White Fleet on a world tour.
What was the Great White Fleet?
It was a powerful naval force.
Okay.
And he sent it around the world to demonstrate American might.
So he was basically saying, hey, look at us. We're a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, pretty much. He believed that a strong military presence was essential to maintaining peace and deterring potential adversaries.
It seems like he was really setting the stage for America's emergence as a global superpower.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. His policies really expanded American influence, strengthened the military, and established this precedent for interventionism that would continue throughout the 20th century.
So it all goes back to that idea of unintended consequences.
Right. Czolgosz wanted to strike a blow against the system, but he ended up paving the way for a leader who would take that system and project it onto the world stage.
And it wasn't just foreign policy, right?
No. Roosevelt also made significant changes on the domestic front.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. He was a progressive reformer, wasn't he?
He was. He believed in using the power of the federal government to address social and economic problems.
So what were some of the things he did?
Well, he took on powerful corporations, pushed for food safety regulations, expanded national parks.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, he was a very active president. He believed in using the power of the presidency to make a difference in people's lives.
And one of the things he's most famous for is trust busting, right?
Yes, he was very concerned about the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few.
Okay.
And he used the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up several powerful trusts.
Like which ones?
Well, the most famous example is probably Standard Oil.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one.
But he also went after other trusts, like the Northern Securities Company, which was a railroad conglomerate.
So he was basically trying to level the playing field.
Yeah, he believed that monopolies stifled competition and harmed consumers.
It's amazing how many of the issues that Roosevelt tackled are still relevant today.
It is, isn't it? We're still debating the role of government regulation, the power of corporations, the need to protect consumers and the environment.
Yeah, it just shows that history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the forces that have shaped our present and the challenges that we continue to face.
Well said.
So I guess the big question is, what can we learn from all of this?
Well, I think there are a few key takeaways.
Okay.
First, it highlights the unpredictable nature of history.
Right. One event can trigger a chain reaction that leads to something completely unexpected.
Exactly. Like the butterfly effect.
Second, it shows how different leaders can have very different visions for the country.
Right. McKinley and Roosevelt both faced similar challenges, but they had very different ideas about how to address them.
And I think it also reminds us that history is an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, we're constantly reinterpreting the past, uncovering new perspectives, and drawing connections to our own time.
So we should never stop learning and asking questions.
Exactly. The more we learn about the past, the better equipped we are to understand the present and shape the future.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up.
Yeah, this has been a really fascinating discussion.
This deep dive into the assassination of William McKinley has taken us on quite a journey.
It has. We've explored the world of anarchism, the rise of American global power, the legacy of Theodore Roosevelt.
And it's all connected in this really intricate and fascinating way.
Yeah, it just goes to show that history is full of surprises.
And that even the most tragic events can have unexpected consequences.
Absolutely. So for our listeners, if you're interested in learning more about this period of American history, be sure to check out the resources we've linked in the show notes.
Yeah, there's a lot of great information out there. And as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into history.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.